All right. Well, welcome to the Pikes Peak Business Builder Series. My name is Brandon Eldridge, and I am the Executive Director here at the Colorado SBDC serving Pikes Peak. For those of you who may not be familiar with our office, the SBDC provides no-cost, one-on-one business advising and practical training for entrepreneurs and small businesses at every stage of growth. We work with startups and established businesses alike, supporting everything from business planning, marketing strategy to financial readiness, operations, and leadership development. This Business Builder series takes place every Wednesday during the lunch hour. The goal is simple, to give you 1 hour focused each week to step back from the daily grind and work on your business instead of constantly reacting to what's inside of it. Today's topic is one that impacts every business, regardless of the size or industry: customer service. Customer service isn't just about being polite, it's about retention, reputation, referrals, and ultimately revenue. In competitive markets, the business that win are often the ones that make people feel seen, heard, and valued, especially when things don't go perfectly. I'm excited to introduce Keith Hessel, retention specialist and founder of Serve Business Consulting. Keith is partnering with us to deliver a condensed version of what he calls "It's a Blast to Serve." And today he's going to walk us through the Serve method, practical de-escalation techniques, and strategies to help your team consistently deliver excellence in every customer interaction. So whether you're leading a team or working on the front line yourself, or building a system to scale, today's session will give you actionable tools that you can implement immediately. So, with that, let's jump right in and please welcome Keith Hessel. Take it away, buddy.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Brendan. And yes, so I am Keith Hessel. And I've a little bit of background as far as what I've been doing. I've been in customer service of some kind or another for a little over 20 years now. Whether that is a boots on the ground, answering phone calls in a call center, all the way up to team lead, director, management level. Um, and so this is all theoretically going to be on PowerPoint. So let me get that started up here. Yeah, right. There we go. So yes, so blast and serve are two very conveniently named acronyms, and serve is one that was developed by yours truly. It basically takes a whole bunch of different customer service methods because if you Google customer service methods, you'll find a whole bunch of them. There's the four P's, the four R's, the four C's. You find whichever one works the best for you. Um, Beyond that, blast is an industry standard de-escalation technique. And it was actually pioneered by McDonald's. So, I give credit where credit is due there, but you will find it in any call center environment that you either work in, interact with, have to use, whatever the case may be. Whether that is for Samsung, Verizon, Comcast, CenturyLink, um, all the way down to health insurance. United Healthcare. If you call one of the call centers, you'll be able to see what they're doing through that blast method. Um, and here we go. So first and foremost, as far as customer service goes, you have to know what you're dealing with. So know thine customers. What is bringing them to your business? You have a business or you're starting up a business, whatever the case may be. What is it that's going to be bringing customers to you? And you want to get specific with this. You want to know what it is that brought that individual person to your business. Was it the reputation? Was it the fact that maybe you're one of only a couple business service providers in the area? Whatever that case may be, you want to know what it is that's bringing them through your doors to your website, whatever the case may be. And what has those expectations ended up bringing? Um, what are the standing expectations within your company? What do you expect of your employees when they are interacting with customers? Do your employees know what it is that your services do to their fullest extent? Little backstory behind that one. I actually worked for a company one time where half of the employees didn't know what the other half were doing. So that is something that you need to be able to avoid very quickly in order to deliver a consistent customer experience. And along those lines, you need to know what your customers are expecting coming in, meaning what is your marketing team doing? What are they doing to actually drive customers to you? Are they promising are they making realistic expectations with whatever it is that they're using to market your service? Part two, know yourself. And by that, not only am I talking about you personally, it's always a good idea to know your personal why, but also know your company. How many people do you or your employees serve every day? And I'm not talking, how many did they have this last Monday? How many do you expect to have next Thursday? I'm asking how many people on average does your company serve over the course of a month, a quarter, a year, whatever the case may be? What is that average number? Because from that, you need to know what the interactions look like. How many positive interactions do you have? How many times do you leave a customer walking away saying, that was incredible? You know what? This is the first time I ever used them, but I want to make sure that, I tell my coworkers about that place. That was amazing. On the flip side, how many of those interactions are maybe not so positive along the lines of, oh, good Lord, I am never going there again. What was I thinking? If you don't know those numbers, that needs to become one of your most standard and one of your most sought after KPIs, key performance indicator, because that number is going to tell you how referable your business is. To make that easier, a lot of times you'll see that number dictated as net promoter score. Net promoter score is a measurement of how referable your business is. And you've all seen this question come up. If you've ever filled out, a customer satisfaction survey or something like that, it's always the last question. Based on your experience, how likely are you to refer us to friends and family? Always goes from 0 to 10. Quick crash course in net promoter score. It goes from negative 100 to positive 100. If you have a net promoter score above 0, that means that generally people are okay. The higher that score, the better your customer service is. If you have a score below 0, seek help immediately, because that means that your business will be shutting down soon. May not be tomorrow, may not be next week, but if you have a negative net promoter score, you are in trouble. I'm not going to mince words with that. So, how can you start serving customers that'll bring you a positive net promoter score? Well, that's where the serve method comes in. Kind of like I said at the very beginning there, the serve method is a conglomeration, here's my big word for the day, of customer service methods that you find across a variety of industries. There's the 4 C's: care, compassion, content, and correctness. A lot of times you tend to find that in some of the more health related fields. There are the 4 P's: um, presentation, perception, perseverance, and positivity. A lot of times you tend to find that a little bit more in the food service industries or the hospitality industries. What I did when I created SERVE is I wanted an acronym that could be applied regardless of industry. And so that's where this comes from. So what does the S stand for? S stands for smile. You can always see, you can always hear, you can always feel when someone is smiling at you. I give you an example right now. I'm sharing my screen, but just to be on the safe side, I'm actually going to turn off my camera so that we can't see it no matter what. And so here's the deal. When we are interacting with someone, how you actually interact with them matters. Thanks so much for calling Serve Business Consulting. This is Keith. How can I help you today? That's option one. Here's option two. Thanks so much for calling Serve Business Consulting. My name is Keith. How can I help you today? Which one was I smiling? Even when you can't see my face, you can hear that smile. And that smile is going to set the tone for everything. It is literally going to determine how that interaction is going to go without you even saying a word. And it's going to set your attitude as well. One of the hardest things to do in customer service is to smile after you've been dealing with a particularly difficult customer. Here's the cool thing with that, though. Even if it's a plastered on smile, this is the ultimate fake it till you make it method. So whether the smile actually reaches your eyes, as our friends in photography would say, or the smile actually reaches your heart, as my wife, the teacher, would mention, it really doesn't matter. If there is a smile plastered on your face, it's going to come across in that interaction. E is for engage. So this is really, this kind of determines how you are professionally interacting with this person. When they come to you and they tell you what their need is, do you paraphrase that back to them to make sure that you heard them correctly? Are you making eye contact? This is especially applicable, obviously, for those of you who have brick and mortar locations or are used to doing Zoom meetings with with your contacts. Are you making eye contact with them? Because that is going to tell that person how well you're engaging with them. Think back to a time where you went into a coffee shop or a restaurant or something like that. And have you ever had the barista, for example, fail to make eye contact with you? They're so focused on their screen or they're so focused on writing down what your order is on the side of the cup that they forget to look at you. Do you really have confidence that they heard your order correctly? Maybe, maybe not. Now think about a time where that server, that barista, that host or hostess did make eye contact with you. Is that question of whether they're going to get your order right anywhere near your head? I'm going to guess not. So engaging, smiling, that's how you start out that interaction. That's how you carry that consistency through. Relate is R. Now, this is probably one of the most polarizing portions of the serve method. And it's no accident that it happens to be right in the middle of the word, too. But relate is how are you interacting with that person, not only professionally, but personally as well. So when you're making, when you're talking with them, you're just making that regular, hey, how's your day going? Small talk. Is that small talk relevant to what's actually going on? Here's what I mean by relevant. One of my clients is a brick and mortar location. They have windows all over their waiting area. And when I first got in there, I kid you not, I had some of their front desk staff asking, hey, welcome in, good to see you. How's the weather out there? You got windows all over the room here. Why are you asking them how the weather is? That's one of the first things to get rid of. If it's not relevant to the situation or to how you're interacting with them, don't use those questions. It's kind of like the old joke, what are the topics that you always avoid at Thanksgiving? Politics and sports. That goes for the relate portion of serve too. Stay away from stuff that might become inflammatory. Instead, ask them something that's a little bit more relevant. Hey, welcome in. Great to see you. What do you got going on today? Leave it as an open-ended question. Don't give them a simple yes or no opportunity because honestly, that's going to stick in their head even if they're not aware of it. Oh, they didn't actually care about me. They were just checking off the going through the list and checking stuff off. That's one of the hardest parts of relating is actually relating in a way that's relevant. If say you have them on the phone, you hear a dog barking in the background, it's like, oh, hey, is that your dog? What kind of dog is it? You don't even need to be a dog person to be able to ask that, but you're asking them something that's relevant to them and therefore engaging them. And I guarantee you that's going to leave them with a smile. So all of these things are happening simultaneously. There's the last two portions of serve tend to happen a little bit more sequentially. Verify. This is where this is the transactional portion of whatever your interaction is. This is where you're going back through, you're restating to them, what they came in for, and just making sure that you got everything. If they came in for a service or if they came in with a question, you're going to verify that you answered that question. And not by saying, "Do you have any other questions today?" Because here's what that does, that's a yes no answer. And more often than not, human nature is going to have them saying no, which tends to lead to the next part that has, 13 seconds after they walk out the door, they're going to have questions pop up in their head. Instead of going, "Do you have any other questions?" The best way to ask that is, "What other questions can I answer for you today?" It still gives them the opportunity to say, I'm good to go. Thank you so much. But it leaves it open so that way they're going to be thinking of other questions when you ask that rather than 10, 13, 15 seconds after they end the interaction, whether that's hanging up the phone, walking out the door, whatever the case may be. That's always going to come at the end because you're always verifying that everything's taken care of before that interaction is over. The other thing that often comes at the end, often, not always, is going the extra mile. This is something that will always set people apart. But before we kind of got started recording here, Brandon and I were talking about some of the customer service books. And this is actually one that's really, really well advocated for in Be Our Guest. That's the Disney customer service method, is what can you do to make the other person's day? It can be something big, like, being able to give them a discount that they didn't necessarily ask for, or applying a coupon that maybe they didn't know about. That's perfect. That's awesome. It can be something really simple too. I'll give you an example. Another one of my clients, their waiting room is always fully stocked with a coffee bar for customers, also for employees, but mainly for customers. One of the easiest ways that I have them going that extra mile is pointing out the fact that there's a coffee bar. It's like, "Hey, there's some coffee in the back while you're waiting. Please help yourself." Note how I said that too. Please help yourself. It almost encourages people to go back there and at least see what's available. Maybe they don't necessarily want anything, but it gives them that opportunity to see what they can have, what's there, what's available for them, as opposed to, "Hey, there's a coffee bar back there, don't hesitate to get something." When you say it like that, they're always going to hesitate because they're always going to be like, "Well, I don't want to be the first one to go and get something. I'll just wait." Whereas you'll "please help yourself" is inviting them to go and take a look. So that is the serve method. That's kind of the overarching idea behind all of this. And like I said, it's applicable to any and every industry. You name an industry, I will give you an example of how this program works. I guarantee you I will find one. And that's not something I guarantee lightly.
I love this, Keith. I'm going to jump in here. I don't have any
Yeah,
questions from the chat yet, but I was writing a couple pro tips in here, and we did kind of outline what the SERVE acronym is. I was reminded of one of my first jobs. I worked at Lids. It's a hat store, and we had one
really good
called,
example.
yeah, we had one called Drive, and it was deliver a friendly greeting within 5 seconds, and remember a second hat and accessory. And I always remember like what the acronym stood for. So I think if you're going to build a culture in your business, having an acronym like this is actually helpful because then it helps your employees remember the steps to that because not everybody is built for customer service. You kind of have to train it sometimes, and you're going to hire folks that aren't always intuitively aware of like what's the next thing after you say hi, right? And I was thinking about I used
Yes.
to run a bank many years ago, and my tellers would always say, "How's the weather?" And we were in a branch where it was nothing but windows. It was like, you know how the weather is, you could see it. So
Exactly.
I would have bingo contests where on the bingo card, it would have different things that they could say to the client that walked in instead of how's the weather or how was your weekend? Because I was trying to encourage more conversation, engaging and meeting your client where they are versus just like be having a very superficial conversations because I think this is where the sales comes in is once you find that relatable thread and you can start pulling on that, that's where you can start to like build a lifelong client. And I like this method that you've
Yes.
got here. I love the serve method. So anyways, I just want to add some context of what I was thinking.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the biggest things that you tend to run into, even with the weather question, I the weather question is a personal pet peeve of mine, in case anyone's wondering, is that say it's a really nasty weather day wherever they are. Is that what you want them to be thinking about now while you're trying to make a sale or trying to upsell or something like that? So it even has implications not only from the customer service side, but on the sales side, on the retention side, is just having that ability to relate with someone. And it's for some people it's a natural ability, but it's one that you can learn as well if you actually care about doing a good job with your customers. But no, that those are very, very good points. I love that bingo card idea too. I gotta, if it's cool with you, Brandon, I might actually incorporate that into my big training that I
Yeah,
do
go
this
for
with.
it. One of the ones we put on there was say the word alligator to the client. And my teller with one time she said, have you ever gone to like an exotic restaurant that maybe sells like eel and alligator? And he was like, oh my gosh, there's this place in Denver and they do sell alligator. And they had this wild conversation about restaurants, and that's how she used the word alligator in a sentence. It was really cool.
That is perfect. That is perfect. Something that you can use, something that can spark conversation, and something that you can incentivize for your employees too. That's awesome.
Yeah, I that's
Uh,
actually a good point, and I don't want to hold you up here, but we turned it into a contest. So then, the competitive side of
mhm.
me gets fired up. The folks that aren't competitive still have a reward if they participate. And having some sort of reward mechanism for your employees, I don't know if you'll get to this or if you talk about this, but reward mechanisms I think are very important if you're driving a culture of customer service because you want to reward good
Yes,
behavior. So
absolutely. So admittedly, I won't get to that in here, but sorry, little plug. I also do a course called Background Leadership that we go into some of that. So that's awesome. Uh, yeah. So I mean, and these are all great ways to engage customers. So that does kind of beg the question then, what happens when maybe the customer's been engaged in a not so positive way? Um, and that's where Blast comes in. So it's kind of getting back on track there. Like I said, the Blast method is not mine. Um, So this was actually developed by McDonald's in the 80s when McDonald's was becoming more of a real estate company than a fast food company. If you're curious what that means, actually Google how McDonald's franchising works. It's kind of a weird model, but they needed a way that they could standardize operations across all the different franchises when something went wrong with a customer, and that's where this came from. And now I actually have to laugh. I can't call um, like Xfinity technical support and keep a straight face because I teach this stuff, so I'm kind of a nerd about it, and I can actually check off every single time when I'm talking to one of their representatives. Okay, all right, yep, thank you. Yes, I know you believe me. I know you're listening. Thank you so much. There's the apology. All right, here comes the solution. Here we go. And I actually get kind of a kick out of listening to them go through these steps. But that aside, yes, BLAST is another easily remembered acronym. So the first two kind of go hand in hand. So I'm not going to separate these out. Believe and listen. Rule number one when you are dealing with an escalated customer, and this can be a legitimate or a erroneous escalation, it doesn't matter, despite what Reddit subthreads may say. Rule number one: always believe them, because from a customer's perspective, they have been wronged. Even if they were wronged by their own misunderstanding, they have been wronged, and you are not in a position to argue with that. Because at that point, you are arguing with emotion. And anyone who is married knows that arguing with emotion does not work. For more information, please ask my wife. So the first rule is listening to them. You are going to be actively listening, not interrupting. It does not matter what they say. that is inaccurate. The only situation that you are allowed to interrupt a customer is if they are becoming belligerent. More about that coming up here. But as a rule of thumb, you are not interrupting that person. Feel free to take notes. Feel free to write stuff down or type stuff out, because once they're done, you're going to want to make sure that you can kind of recap everything that they've said. But by listening, you are looking to understand the underlying emotion that brought them back. Is it frustration? Is it anger? Is it irritation? What's going on here? You're also listening to understand what the actual issue is. So believe and listen, those two go hand in hand. And bear in mind, and I talk about this in a little bit too, but no matter how angry they are, they're generally not coming in angry at you. It's not personal. It's never personal unless you make it personal. Perfect example of that one. I actually had to call a customer service line one time, and I'm not proud to admit, but this is one of the only times I have ever actually personally cussed out a customer service representative. This is not an excuse for doing so, but it happened literally because they were making the situation worse by not providing any sort of solution. Instead of, taking a look to see what they could do, instead of taking a look to see what they could help with, they were stonewalling the entire time. That is when it goes from being, irritation with the issue or the product or the service or whatever, to irritation with that person specifically. More about that later. Once you've listened to them, once you've heard out the entire situation, you're going to do one of two things. You will either apologize for whatever inconvenience or misunderstanding that may have happened, or you're going to acknowledge that this is a very frustrating situation. Under no circumstances, I talk about this in a minute too, but I'm going to say it right now as well. Under no circumstances do you ever apologize for that specific situation. Here's why. It opens you up to so many legal issues. Even if something wasn't your fault to begin with, if you apologize for that specific issue, it makes it your fault. And depending on your industry, depending on what legalities you have to abide by in your specific service, that can open you up to a whole bunch of litigation. There are only two people allowed to determine fault in those situations, and that's the lawyers and the insurance companies. Anything else is above your pay grade, even if you're the owner. So after you have at least acknowledged, if not apologized for any inconvenience, frustration, misunderstanding, whatever the case may be, that's when you're going to start solving it. And when you're solving the escalation, when you're solving the issue, two rules of thumb. First, focus on what you can do. When you are dealing with an escalated situation, there are three words that you are never, ever, ever allowed to use under any circumstances: can't, won't, and don't. For no reason should you ever say those words, because what's that going to do? It is only going to further escalate the situation. And that's bad, in case you were wondering. Instead, whatever solution you phrase, even if it is pointing out that that service is really something that you offer, there's a different way to phrase it. And that's putting that positive spin on it. And you hear about this in, public speaking courses and, business seminars all the time. And I'm going to say it myself, is putting a positive spin on things will de-escalate a situation faster than you can say, Karen. Yeah, I used the name. I'm well aware. This does not apply to all Karens, just putting out that disclaimer. When you focus on what you can do, you're going to be, instead of saying, I'm sorry, we don't actually do that. You're going to be flipping that around to, you know what, that's a very interesting, comment. That's a very interesting concern. Here's what we can do to help with that. See how that flips it around? And instantly you are back in control. You are back in the customer's corner, helping them out, serving them. Here's the other cool thing with the blast method is that solution education usually solves the problem. Very, very rarely do you ever have to throw money at a problem to actually make it go away. And honestly, that's actually something that separates the good companies from the great companies. When you see situations that, for example, one of the big telecom companies, how often do they offer you a discount just to make you go away? Well, they can afford to do that. Good for them. All right, they're a Fortune 100 company, one of the top 100 companies in the country. Yeah, they, throwing $120 at you to keep you quiet for a year, that's nothing. How many of our listeners here, how many of you guys can throw $120 at anything, much less a customer complaint? I'm gonna go out on a limb here and guess that not many, if any of you can do that. Whereas educating a customer on what you actually do, on how the service actually works, on what that product actually does, educating them with that positive mindset, that'll solve about 98% of your escalated situations. And I am not making that number up. That number actually comes from a Cambridge University study that they did back in 2007, showing that education solves more than discounts. It solves more problems than refunds. Education keeps that customer informed, it keeps that customer engaged, and more often than not, it's going to keep that customer coming back because they're going to have a more realistic expectation of how your company operates. Now, finally, when all of that is said and done, the hardest thing that you will ever do, even harder than relating to them from that last slide, is thanking them. Thanking a customer, saying thank you, goes so much further than so many people realize. Even if it's just a thank you for bringing this to our attention. I know that the solution is not quite what you were expecting, but thank you for bringing this to our attention. Or, thank you so much for your patience as we work through this. We're going to be going through this over the next 5 to 7 business days, and you should hear back from us within that time. Or just thanking them for the opportunity to help out. Hey, I know there was a misunderstanding there. Thank you so much for letting us clear the air, clear that up. That thank you goes so much further than so many people realize. And as with so many things, it's the thought behind it that counts. So even if you're in your own mind, you're thinking, well, thank you for giving me an excuse to get you out of my door. Maybe don't actually say that, but that can still be the positive aspect is, you know what? You were able to help that customer find something that's a little better suited to what they were looking for. There's nothing wrong with that. And I do have a little bit of a sales background, and I know how much of a blasphemy I just committed. But even if it's helping them find something that's going to be better suited to them, that's going to be what they remember about you personally. Like, Jason wasn't able to help me out that well, but he was honest with me. He still pointed me in the right direction of someone who did have what I was looking for. That's going to keep the reputation of your company that much higher, that much more of a service mentality when they know, hey, I know they want my business, but I also know that they're looking out for me. So that's really where that blast method comes in. Now, there are a couple things that need to go along with blast before I can actually move on to any questions with that one. Um, so here's a couple reminders. First and foremost, keep your personal opinions away from the customers. Your personal opinions, your personal reasons, the explanation, the justification for why they should not be feeling that way has absolutely no place in this interaction. That's coffee room talk. That's break room talk. That's, behind the scenes stuff. One of the best examples of what not to do, take a look the next time you have a moment at Google review responses, specifically the ones, and God bless them, private mechanics are the best at this. Take a look at the ones where they actually call out the customer on that Google review response. How many people are going to read that Google review And how many people are going to stay away because, well, I don't want them to call out because they think something didn't happen right. Even if that's not actually what they're saying out loud, that's what they're thinking. So, along with those lines, when you're dealing with an escalated Google review, rule of thumb, when you write a response, you are writing to the people who will read that review in the future. The person who left that review, they're gone. They couldn't care less what you have to say. They're out of there. In fact, if you call them out, it's just going to make them more angry. So when you're de-escalating from a Google review standpoint, you're writing to the people who are going to read that response. Secondly, drain your emotions. If we're in a phone call or an email or a chat situation, this is very easy to do because you can be hitting the mute key, you can be doing something to release that frustration as they are ranting at you, whatever the case may be. When you're in person, that requires a different approach because any frustration has to stay below your shoulders. So one of the best things that I always have recommended for people is if you're sitting down, tap your foot on the floor, especially effective if you're on a carpeted surface, because you're taking out your frustration. You are doing something physical to keep that frustration from entering your shoulders or up, but you're still letting your body deal with it. If you're standing and talking to someone, stand with your hands down at your waist level, intertwine your fingers, and squeeze the bejeebies out of your fingers. All of that frustration is going to be from your wrists in your hands. It's not going to be in your shoulders. So again, that just helps you further avoid further escalating that situation. Number three, this is just what I was saying before. It's not personal unless you make it personal. 99% of the time, they are frustrated with the situation and they're just taking that frustration out on you. And finally, just bear in mind, do not assume personal responsibility for any disagreements or legal issues because that will open you up to litigation and you do run the risk of being sued out of existence. So that is the blast method. There are situations where people will be severely escalated, and I'll get into that in a quick second here. But Brandon, do you have any questions in the chat at the moment, or?
Nope. You can keep rolling.
All righty. So what happens if the customer is beyond pissed? And that's the politically correct version of what I normally see in an in-person training. That's where we get into the three strike rule. Now, this is a crash course on the three strike rule. Um, Normally, admittedly, I do go a little bit more in depth with this if I'm doing an in-person training, but you guys will at least get the basics here. So first and foremost, be polite but firm when you have a customer who is being abusive. And I do mean abusive. I've seen situations, thankfully, I've never been involved with one, where customers are coming and swinging their arms trying to actually hit someone, trying to knock stuff off your shelves. I have actually been spat on by customers. The most common form of abuse, though, is verbal abuse. Now, that one, I am right there with you guys in the trenches. I have literally been called every name in the book. When I say that, I mean every name in the book up to and including the good book. I actually got called the Whore of Babylon one time. Um, yeah, that was a unique situation, but that does not mean that you can sink to their level. Um, what it does mean is that you get to give that customer two warnings. And those warnings, if they have clearly outlined consequences, can be your reason to hang up the phone on a customer, have that customer escorted out of the building, whatever the case may be. But you give them those warnings with very clearly outlined, here's what's going to happen. For example, ma'am, I'm trying very hard to help you right now. I do want to make sure that we can resolve this, but if we cannot do so in a professional manner, I am going to end this interaction. Feel free to replace end this interaction with whatever is most applicable to you. There is no space for vagueness. There's no space for ambiguity. You cannot beat around the bush with these warnings. But as long as they are delivered in a professional and succinct manner, they are perfectly legitimate. On the third offense, that is where you follow through. Now, when you are following through, here's the clincher. Everything up to that point and after does need to be thoroughly documented. Because if they try to bring a Better Business Bureau complaint against you, if they try to bring lawyers into this, you need to have documentation saying, no, here's what actually happened. It's not unlike dealing with a civil court case. But on that third offense, you follow through. Now, if you are a business owner, if you are a manager working with employees on this three strike rule, as a manager, it is your job to support that employee in the moment. No exceptions. You cannot come out and suddenly dismiss what the employee is saying and cave to the customer, because that'll do two things. That'll embolden the customer to think that they can just come in and walk all over you. Number two, that will undermine your employee. And when employees don't feel supported at the workplace, what's the first thing they do? Bye. They're gone. And little retention tidbit for you, customer churn costs a lot of money, but losing employees actually costs more. Think of your lowest paid employee right now. Now, if that's you, this might not be applicable. But for your staff, think of what your lowest paid employee would be making each year. Take that annual salary, multiply it by 2.5. Now flush all that money down the drain, because that's what happens when an employee walks out on you. So if you are undermining them or not willing to support them in those situations, you're going to lose that employee. In order for the third offense, for that third strike to be most effective, having a set expectation with your employees as far as how do we notify management that we're in a third strike situation. Sometimes there'll be a radio or some kind of alert system out of the front desk that can bring an employee, that can bring a manager out quickly. Sometimes the manager is just sitting right there, so they already know what's going on. But what is the procedure when they have a third strike situation? Because under no circumstances should anyone but a manager or the owner be escorting someone out of the building. Hanging up the phone, that's one thing. That's very easy to document. Employee can just send an email to the manager afterwards. But if you have to escort someone out of the building, there's only two people allowed to do that: managers/owners and the cops. And it's up to the manager to figure out what's going to be the best option for that one. Again, kind of getting into those legalities. But that's the rundown of the three strike rule. Now, there are what ifs, there are rabbit holes out the wazoo with this. Some of the most common ones that I tend to run into are dealing with discriminatory language or highly offensive language. The N word, for example. A lot of places have a zero tolerance policy for that. That's fantastic. So if you skip the first two strikes and go straight to the third strike, if that is your policy, by all means. Bottom line with this is having some sort of framework that employees can use to exit out of severely escalated situations. Now, here's the deal. For employees, if you caused that escalation, this doesn't work. So if you're dealing with that, you want to avoid those at all times. Two other things, just really, really quick here. First, glass doesn't always work immediately, especially in situations where supply chain may be something, or it takes a little bit longer to get approval for whatever you need to do to fix the issue. As long as you're setting up this concrete timeline with the customer, though, that's going to be all that's really necessary. And it may take a couple iterations of de-escalating them, especially if timelines aren't met. But as long as you're consistent, that's where that retention will come in. Secondly, this is just a good rule of thumb. Once you have employees, no one gets paid enough to take abuse. Keeping that abusive customer around will only damage your business. For more details, refer back to the numbers that I was just going over. And it looks like we do have a question that popped up there.
Yeah, so thanks, Keith. And that you're starting to get into some heavy stuff here that, we just had an HR class, a webinar 2 weeks ago about, when to start to coach your employees out of an organization. And
Yes.
I think, this isn't a sales class and this isn't an HR class, but it certainly is a culture class. And the reason I say that is because standardizing what you as an entrepreneur want for your business through an SOP or a policy or something that you can define, it should really kind of lean into your mission and vision. If you've done your business planning and you have that business plan and it has your mission and your vision, hopefully a policy around customer service kind of marries into what that mission of your organization should look like. And
Hmm.
so, when it comes to how do you want your employees behaving, I think about this a lot, Keith, where a lot of entrepreneurs don't practice what they preach, right? Like you can
Yes.
have an entrepreneur who's either overtly passive or over aggressive, and you could have both ends of that. And if you're one of those entrepreneurs that has to kind of take a tough look at how are you interacting and how do you personally deal with these interactions, I would implore you to kind of look at it how you would want your employees treating your clients too. And a lot of times it's not even just about how you treat the clients, but it's how you treat your employees and your contractors and the people that are helping you run the business in the first place. Um,
Absolutely.
One of the questions that came up though, getting to that now is how do you document in the heat? Do you do it in the heat of the moment? Do you wait till it's over? And before you answer that, like I was thinking about like aggressive clients that are using like the internet as a way to harass your business, right? Like I go and I
Hmm.
write a bunch of bad Google reviews, or I constantly am emailing somebody on your team, or like, and some of these things can turn into like, you might have to get the authorities involved or something like that. But
Hmm.
I guess my answer, and then I'll let you take it from there, Keith, is, you know, I think you need to have a policy. This is why I would put this as a pro tip in here. Have a policy that kind of defines what is the next step. What is it in the heat of the moment? Should you have something that at the end of each day, somebody who's client facing should do a debrief on different situations? Maybe it's after the interaction where it's really like fresh. Or maybe it's every week when you're scrubbing the online comments on your Google reviews, you have a policy that you've created that says how do you respond to different scenarios. What do you think, Keith?
Absolutely. So, and that's a very fair question, and there is no single answer, unfortunately, um, except for yes, have some sort of policy, have some sort of procedure written down for these situations. As far as documenting stuff, again, that's going to vary by the situation. If you are talking to them on the phone, you can be typing out what's going on as you're conversing, especially as they're raving and ranting at you. Um, if it's in person, generally it's going to have to be after the fact. Now, here's the cool thing with the three strike rule. More often than not, from my own personal experience, I would say about 60% of the time, one strike is all that's needed. Just saying, hey, if we can't keep this professional, we're not going to continue on with this. Um, and a lot of times that'll kind of snap people out of whatever rage they're in long enough for you to actually start de-escalating the situation. But you're still going to want to document it's like, hey, I did have to give one verbal warning to the customer. And that can go into the interaction notes. Um, that can go just a quick email to, a quick email to your manager, just saying, hey, after the person leaves, he's like, hey, this guy came in again, and I had to give him a warning in order to calm down. Some sort of email, some sort of documentation of what happened. And more often than not, it won't go any further. It won't need to go anywhere from there. But yes, that's going to depend on the situation. That's going to depend on um, the mode of interaction. But I would not recommend documenting while the person's standing there. It's like, hey, I'm typing into my computer right now. I just gave you a strike. I don't do that. So yeah, good rule of thumb is in person after the fact. Over the phone or via chat during that interaction works well.
That's good tips. Two questions came through, and I want to be respectful of your time here, Keith, to make sure you get through your whole presentation too. But One question is what if the employee was the one that was wrong? And again, I think it goes back to having a policy and documenting. So if you're an entrepreneur, you got staff and you're going, I'm starting to identify that. Go back to our webinar we just did on HR and when to have those
Mhm.
tough conversations. And then, Aaron, you had a good question. And what do you specifically document? And this is my favorite question in entrepreneurship, which or my favorite answer, which is it depends. Depends on the culture of your business. It depends on what you want to document. It depends if you're BBB accredited. It depends if you are in an industry that values customer service to get that Michelin star. Like it just depends on
Mhm.
what you're trying to level set for. So what I've done is I've just pasted in um, the eight standards of trust from the BBB. This might be a good framework for you to like build a policy around. Are these eight things being discussed with your team, with your internal dialogue, so that you can build a framework and say, these are my standards and they might loosely follow the BBBs, but maybe it's just your own way of working your business. And then that's how you hold your staff accountable. That's how you can draw the line in the sand that says, that's unacceptable. I'm going to protect my team right now instead of just bowing to your angry needs or whatever that looks like.
Absolutely. And this is something I go over a little bit um, in the background leadership course that I do. But one of the biggest things to remember is the moment you hire an employee, whether that's your first employee or your first manager, whatever the case may be, once you hire an employee, once you have an employee answering to you, that employee is now your customer. So the customer's coming through the doors, you hired that person to take care of them. So in some ways, that's beyond your pay grade to use the to use an uncommon phrase there. Um, but once you have that employee just became your customer. So when you take a look at it from that lens, that gives you a pretty good idea of, okay, where do I need to step in and where can I kind of let this ride?
Yeah, I like you talk about this because I oftentimes say a client experience often reflects an employee experience, and so
Mhm.
those two things are very complementary. Keith, you got about 5 minutes left to present, so I want to make sure you get through any slides that you want to touch on today.
Ah, perfect. So actually, so just this is a quick case study, if you will. Um, North Springs Veterinary, well, they used to be Veterinary Referral Center. Now they are Veterinary Emergency Emergency Medicine and Specialty Center. Um, and they're up on the north side of the Springs. I use this with their permission. Um, we did the serve method training. We did the full on, it's a blast to serve training with them back in June of 2024. Now, before that, they were sitting at about 4.3 on Google. When we got to 2020, when we got to September of 2024, so between May and September, they actually raised that a full tenth of a point, which when we're talking hundreds of Google reviews, increasing it like that, that's a feat. That is an accomplishment there. Um, their customer satisfaction surveys. So we were doing some feedback on that end. They went from 4.6 before we did the training to 4.8 in that September. Same thing with their net promoter score. They had almost a 10-point increase. To put a 10-point increase on the net promoter score into perspective, that means that you are retaining almost 3% more customers than you were before. Here's the cool thing. A 2%, this is from the Wall Street Journal, a 2% increase in customer retention rates can equal anywhere from a 25 to a 95% increase in your revenue. This one equates to about a 3% increase in customer retention. So, do with that number what you will. One thing that's also not actually on here, if you look on their Google reviews, and I actually put this on my own website too, servebc.com. They had a customer who had come to them before they did the training, and then they had a customer who came to them, and then that same customer came to them after they did the training. And that customer in their Google review, they updated their Google review from 2 stars to 5 stars. because the change in the empathy, the change in the interaction was so noticeable. So when I say that, the serve method works, I'm not just, blowing smoke. I It actually works. And this is just a little quick recap. And I would go over this, except thanks, Brendan. I saw you actually put that in the chat. So
Yep, yeah, we got it in the chat
I'm
here.
not going to waste time with that one. Um, so that is actually all I have. Uh,
Yeah.
quick, quick little plug. This QR code will let you sign up for the monthly newsletter that I put out on the first Monday of every month. It's called the Monthly Service Update, and it just gives you these little tidbits every single month. And it is only once a month. I try very hard not to spam people. So that way, if you're curious about this, if you want to keep kind of going on with the serve or the blast method, this is the best way to do it.
I love it. So you had some really good stuff there. I'm going to recap some of our pro tips here. So pro tip number one,
Yes.
make sure your team is communicating internally so that the right hand is talking to the left. Pro tip number two, track what clients are saying about you. Net promoter score, Google reviews, whatever it is, make sure that you have a mechanism to track the feedback. Number three, try to only apologize for inconveniences and frustrations. And try to avoid and according to Keith, never ever ever say words like can't and won't. Um, and then pro tip number four, have a policy that is used as a framework of behavioral standards. And I put in the BBB standards of trust, but what you're trying to do is anticipate different scenarios that the policy could help you um, provide a framework for your employees or for yourself even on how do you want this interaction to go, whether you're a service industry or you're selling a product, or maybe you're in a niche thing where you only do contract work and you're constantly bubbling from one contractor to another. And, every time you interact with somebody, it's a different experience. Well, for you yourself as that entrepreneur, it's important to kind of hold yourself accountable to certain standards. But I will
Yeah.
say I've known Keith a long time. He's passionate about customer service. He has built a really good framework here. He's a good friend and colleague of the SBDC, so we're grateful for your time today. If you are interested in attending more of these, please know every Wednesday, 12 o'clock, we're going to be right here. We're going to be talking about different topics. We've talked about credit card processing, HR practices, chronic stress as an entrepreneur. So we just have such great speakers, so many beautiful people in our community doing great work. So continue to go to pikespeaksbdc.org. You can get your free one-on-one consultations and keep signing up for more of these sessions. We'd love to have you. That's it, my friends. Thanks.
All right. Thank you guys. Good to see you all.